Good morning. My name is Brenda Sheik, and today is June 10th, 2014. And we are in the Oklahoma County Extension Office interviewing Loveta Hammond as part of the Voices of Extension Oral History Project. So Loveta, thank you for joining us this morning.
Okay, you're welcome.
First, just for the sake of the camera and things like that, can you spell your name for us?
Loveta Hammond.
D. I didn't put a D on it, did I? Hammond.
Hammond.
Hammond. Okay. Tell us a little bit about your early life. When and where were you born?
I was born March 2nd, 1951 in Bristow, Oklahoma. My parents were Vivian and Willie Hammond. We lived 8.5 miles south of Bristow on Highway 48. I have 4 sisters and 2 brothers. I was the second child. I have 1 older sister. And when we were growing up, we lived on a farm. My grandparents lived with us for a short period of time. And my sister and I were the boys. We had to help do the farm chores at home because we were the 2 older ones. And we were heavily influenced by the extension program because my parents and grandparents were users of the extension service.
And so what were your brothers and sisters' names, starting at the oldest?
Okay, Pauline is the oldest, and then of course me, and then I have a brother, Terry, and then there were twins in our family. We thought my mother had stolen a baby when she came home with twins. James and Jeanette are the twins, and then Joanne, and then Marjorie is my youngest sister.
And the youngest sister, about how much younger is she than you are?
I am 13 years older than my youngest sister.
And your oldest sister, how much older is she?
She's 2 years older than me.
2 years older.
Mm-hmm.
2 years older. You, how did your family come to live there?
That was a family farm that my grandparents had, and my grandfather has an interesting history. He came from South Carolina. He was married 5 times. My grandmother was his last wife, and she had 6 children, 2 daughters, and 3 daughters. One of the daughters died, and 3 sons. And my dad was one of the next to the youngest. Well, he was kind of in the middle, and his other brothers went to the military. All of his other older brothers went to the military, and he went for a short period of time but didn't like it, so he came back to the family farm to help my grandparents, and from there they were just users of extension service, and we farmed the land. We had 2 or 3 gardens. We had fruit orchard. My dad for a while tried to be a peanut farmer till he realized that was not a way to make a living for a family. So he was later retooled and did construction work with a group of men. They drove back and forth to Tulsa every day and did construction. He, in the summertime, would take us to Tulsa and let us look at all the concrete that they poured. They poured all of Oral Roberts University and a lot of the major portions of Tulsa. My mother was a home, and then later on he was again retooled, and he retired from Halliburton as a diesel mechanic. My mother didn't work during our early years. She did go to work at a garment factory in Bristow, and then the garment factory closed and a carpet factory came, and she worked at the carpet factory until she retired.
And what were, you mentioned your grandfather and his 5th wife, which was your grandmother. What
Mm-hmm.
were their names?
Willie B. Hammond and James June Hammond.
James June.
Mm-hmm.
James is in James.
James, right.
Do you know the history of that name?
No, I don't. No, I can't tell you.
You talked a little bit about, your parents, and did you mention that your grandparents were also users of
Yes,
extension?
they were users of extension too. I can remember my grandmother. We lived in a little community called Newby, N-E-W-B-Y, Newby. And there was a Morning Star school that later closed. That was the school that my dad attended. My mother was a town girl. She was from the city of Bristol. Her parents lived in town. And that school closed, and it had a community center called Newbie. And the women in the community would meet together with the home demonstration agent at that time. They would do church quilts, they would do church suppers, they would do gardening projects, home improvement projects, and me and my older sister remember going to the church lunchroom and watching them make quilts, and that was our first experience with extension programming.
So do you remember any of the agents, their names, or any of their history or anything about them?
I remember a few of those Negro agents that I have a picture of. My sister went on to marry C.D. Ashley, who was our 4-H agent's son, Sam. And then his sister-in-law, Artis Fuller from Bowley, was the home demonstration agent that came. The district agent, Hazel O. King, was housed in Creek County, and she made a lot of the meetings.
Was Hazel also a Negro agent?
Yes, she was
Okay.
a Negro district agent. She was a district agent, housed out of Guthrie and in the Langston area, but she lived in Bristow. She had a house in Bristow. There were agents from Okmulgee. I remember Miss Anderson, Miss Maddie Moore, Paul Brooks. Let's see who else. That's about all I can really think of.
When you've mentioned the Negro home demonstration agents and the district staff, so describe how they came to be, or what the differences between them and the white staff were. How did that?
Okay, the Negro agents were a group of professionals that were hired to work in the counties that had high percentages of African American people. And they were worked out of Langston University. I think Langston provided all of their instruction and housed a lot of them. And they were put in the different in 12 different counties in Oklahoma that had high percentages of African Americans for them to work with. All of their trainings, I understand, were conducted at Langston, and they reported to Langston, I guess, for training and instruction and things of that nature. They had a district agent, Hazel O. King, who was the female district agent, and Paul Brooks was the man agent that they reported to. I think they were those agents had a office at the Guthrie City Hall, I believe. That's where they were housed.
So they were housed separately?
Separately than the white agents. Later on, there was a white agent in Sapulpa that used to come and do some work too. Her name was Mrs. Thelma Golden. I went to high school with her son, Doug. And she was an extension agent in the Sapulpa office.
So were there any differences in the activities?
No, I was in 4-H, and we did 4-H events and activities, speech contests, demonstration contests. We went to Roundup, but when we went to Roundup, we went to Langston, not to OSU.
Okay.
So our activities were conducted on the campus of Langston University.
You mentioned a little bit about you and your sister going to club.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what they called it?
Yeah,
then?
club
To
meeting. Club meeting.
With your mother
And my grandmother.
and your grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe a few of those or some of the memories that come from that?
Well, let's see. There was a lady named Miss Hazel Washington, and she later on worked in the CNAP program right after I came. Miss Cheney. Miss Cheney was a lady in the community too that participated. Miss Betsy Lee, Miss Dora Washington, Bernice Jackson, Mrs. Green Howard, just all the people that lived in the little community that we lived in were women that participated in the club and came to those meetings.
What were some of the things that the women with those clubs, what were some of the things that they learned?
Oh, my grandmother and mother were big on gardening and flowers. My grandmother could look at a yard and tell you the name of every flower in the yard. My mother liked to do housekeeping things and knitting, crocheting, things with her hands. And of course, they were big cooks and canners. We canned a lot of food. We raised our own animals, and like I said, we had several gardens. We had fruit orchards that had peaches, apples, pears. We had a couple of pecan trees, 2 black walnut trees, peanut fields, watermelon patch, sweet potato patch. You name it, we had it. And all of those foods were things that we canned for future use. We also had animals. I can remember my grandfather owned 2 horses. One was black and the other one was white. And a thunderstorm came through and lightning struck either the black horse or the white, I don't remember. But they were so close that the other one just whined and cried and whined and cried. And later on, my grandfather had to put that horse to sleep.
Because he was just miserable.
He was, yeah, miserable without the other horse. So we had animals, and we raised chickens, turkeys, hogs and cows, and every year we would butcher. We'd watch our father and a lot of the neighborhood people. My dad had a friend who was a butcher, so he would come and cut up the meat, and they would take it to the packing plant to be wrapped and processed, and then we'd bring it home and put it in the deep freeze for the winter months.
So how did, on the day that you butchered, was it just a one-day event? Describe how that started, and you've kind of talked about the tail end where they wrapped or took it into the locker, but how did that get started? Where did it start in the process?
Okay, first they would secure the animals, and then we'd feed them and get them the right size and the right weight with the help of the county agent, and then he would come and select the ones that needed to be butchered. And then they'd get all the equipment together. I can remember the big black pots that they scalded the animals in and cleaned them up, and then they'd hang them from trees or posts and things that they had in the area, and then did the slaughtering and had these long tables that they cut the meat up on and then sent it on to the processing plant to be processed.
So once that animal was killed, about how long did it take, how many days between killing the animal to taking it to be processed?
Oh, it was sent to the processing plant that evening. That day.
And about how many people would be involved in that? Was it a whole?
Oh, probably 15, 20 men from the community, men and women, because the women helped do some of the processing also.
And was it just, you said the county agent would kind of select that animal. Was it just one animal, or did other people have animals?
Yes, other people had animals, and our slaughtering was done at our place, and then the community people would move to other people's farms to help them do their slaughtering also.
Okay.
So it was kind of a rotational type thing.
Okay. And what were some of the other things that your father learned? You talked about what some of the things that your mother learned. What were some of the things that your father
Okay, he
learned?
did a lot of the meetings with the county agent about crops and animals and just management of the farm equipment, just the day-to-day operation of a farm.
What type of, he obviously had cattle.
Yes.
What type of crops did he grow?
Peanuts, watermelons, peas, sweet potatoes, just all types of vegetables. We also had a blackberry patch and a dewberry patch that produced quite a bit of fruit. And we would set up a little fruit stand because we were right on the highway, and we could sell a lot of our produce to people passing by. And also people in the community knew what you specialized in growing, so when they needed something, they would call and find out if you had enough to share with them or enough for them to buy, if that was what they were interested in.
You talked a little bit about your mother and grandmother canning.
Yes.
Where did they have their own canner? Was that something they bought?
Yes. No, they had their own canner, and of course I was the person that had to wash all the canning jars, and we would wash hundreds of jars at a time. And depending upon the first things that came through were the Irish potatoes and the green beans, because those were the first crops that were ready early in the year. And then the other things came through, like the corn and the sweet potatoes, the greens, just all sorts of things that they can, peas. black-eyed peas.
Would they do that together or separately?
Now, my mother and my grandmother and my aunt would pretty much can together.
And was that in the house, or would they set that up outside?
No, it was in the house, inside the house. Now, they would go to special canning demonstrations at the church lunchroom to learn the latest tricks, tips, techniques, and safety issues. And then they would come home, and then they would do their individual canning at our house.
And would you guys, about how much, I know you put up an awfully lot.
Yes.
Can you quantify that, or would it last you most of the year?
It would last us most of the year into the spring, and then all those jars that were emptied were ready to be put back into use for the next canning season. So probably 400 to 500 jars of things. We also had a smokehouse where they smoked hams and hung in the smokehouse. So
very
we
efficient.
were really, yes.
Very efficient. And you talked, you were a member of 4-H when you were younger. Can you describe those meetings, how that?
Yes, we met 5th hour at the Bristow High School, and we would do flag salute, the pledge, and then conduct our little business. And then we break off into individual projects, whatever project you were interested in. Then there was a leader for that project. And that leader would probably be one of the extension agents or a volunteer that would help us, assist us in selecting the materials needed for the project. If it were clothing, then we'd have to determine how much money we needed and where we were going to get the money from to buy the material for that project. And I remember going to the contest down at Slick High School and making a headscarf, making an apron, making a raglan sleeve top and a skirt. And Mrs. Fuller from Boley was very particular. She was Mr. Ashley's sister-in-law, and she was the home demonstration agent, and she would say, "Hammond, you can sew better than that. Straighten up those stitches." And I ripped a lot because of her perfection. She was a perfectionist and wanted your project to look good. And we won lots of ribbons. I remember doing speech and demonstration contests, making biscuits, making cookies with my partner Gail Jackson, and we won ribbons on a lot of things. And also we took our things to the county fair.
So did the African Americans have a separate county fair, or was that combined with the?
It was, yes, we had a separate county fair.
County fair.
Mm-hmm.
And how many were in your 4-H club?
That's what I'm trying to think. I was intending to call Greg Cheney because he remembers everything, but I think there were about 15 of us because we were different ages and different stages in 4-H. So I believe at least 15 to 20 of us met.
And you mentioned that was at the high school, but what age did you start into 4-H? Were you in high school, or were you?
No, we started in junior high, okay. But all the meetings were held at the high school because the high school had the auditorium. And I remember starting at age 9 and then working all the way through 4-H.
Do you remember any of the specific lessons that some of the agents taught?
They did demonstrate. They taught us how to do a demonstration. I remember going to a class on how to do a demonstration, how to describe your 4-H project, gardening things where you would plant something, do a demonstration on how to plant something or how to make things. So I remember doing those types of demos. You
mentioned how the leader that was so picky on the seams on your sewing, what was her name again? Artis,
Artis Fuller from Boley.
How she made a big difference in your 4-H experience.
Yes.
Do you recall any of the other agents or volunteer leaders and what difference they made or how they influenced you?
Yes, Miss Anderson was a person that helped us do a lot of our cooking projects, and she was very particular about learning to measure correctly and putting things in a recipe in sequence so that the recipe would turn out right. And then just cleanliness and keeping your area clean when you were making your demo, doing your demo.
And how did your involvement, I assume your other brothers and sisters, were they involved?
Yes, they were involved too.
4-H as well?
Everybody.
How did your involvement in 4-H shape your family life?
Well, I think it had a positive effect on us being able to meet people, not be afraid to do things, venture out, learn new things, and just be a well-rounded person.
And you talk about going to the county fair, and you talked about traveling to a couple of contests. Were there any other trips that you took with 4-H?
No, those were the basic places that we went. We really didn't go any out-of-state trips or any out-of-town trips, other than to Langston, to the campus.
And that's where Roundup was held. So was it called Roundup at the time?
Yes, it was called 4-H Roundup.
How did you guys get there? How many days did it last?
It would last a couple of days. Our parents would carpool. Parents in the community would pick up volunteer to take their children in addition to other children. I think our school we used a school bus to take some of them also. And then our church had a small little church bus that was used to transport us to different things too.
And once you got there, I assume you stayed on campus.
Yes, we did.
And describe what that was, how that made you feel as a young kid.
Oh, we were all excited. We were on a college campus and we'd never been there before, and interacting with a lot of the children that were there, and it was just a real neat experience for country children.
And you met other kids from other counties.
Counties, right.
Did
right.
you keep up with any of those?
No, we didn't. No.
Looking back on your involvement with 4-H, is there anything of interest historically that you remember?
Not that I can really think of. Nothing that really stands out.
And so, what year did you graduate from high school?
I graduated in 1969.
And so, during that time, was there any integration efforts going on? How did that work?
I went to Rosenwald Elementary School, and then we were for 2 years, and then integration took place, and I went to Washington Elementary School, and then from Washington, which was integrated, and then Washington Elementary fed us into Bristow Junior High, and then into the high school. So we were pretty much integrated after second grade.
And but the 4-H clubs were
not? No,
they
no. We
stayed.
Yeah, we were we met separately, right?
Did that ever? Did anybody ever wonder about that, or just?
That was just the norm. We didn't really think anything about it.
And so, talk a little bit about do you think your involvement with 4-H or with the Cooperative Extension Service shaped what you wanted to do afterwards, or where you went to college?
Well, yes, right after I graduated from high school, Mr. Ashley kept saying all the children need to go to college, and he had been educated at Langston, and so had Miss Fuller, so of course Langston was the choice. And I went to attended Langston from 1969 to 1973 because there wasn't much to do in Bristow during the summer months, so I always went to summer school. So I went to summer school every summer, and I managed to graduate a semester early. So when I graduated in December, when I finished my coursework in December of 1972, Mr. Ashley, of course, was wanting to know what type of career I was interested in. I majored in home economics at Langston. And so he got me in touch with the district office with OSU Extension, and I applied and came for an interview here in Oklahoma City down at the Federal Building with Joanne Brannon and Ed Gregory. And in about 3 weeks, they called back and said, we're offering you a position to take a job in Oklahoma City. There was 2 jobs available. They were going to do some special project programs in Oklahoma City and in Tulsa. So Linda Murray and I had interviewed during the same time. Linda Murray was from the far southeastern part of the state, and I was kind of from the central part. So they decided that it would probably be easier for me to move to Oklahoma City and Linda to move to Tulsa. So she and I started work March the 1st, 1973, doing extension work. My title then was Extension Home Economist Special Projects. And at that point, when I arrived here in Oklahoma City, can you believe there were like 50 extension homemaker groups? Clara Kelly had come to work that same day. She was a home economist from Cotton County, I believe. Her and Betty Doms had come from those areas. And Betty went to Stillwater and Clara came to Oklahoma County. And Clara Kelly and I started the same day. She showed me the ropes as far as getting started and really helped me a whole lot. At that time, my job was to introduce extension programs to African Americans here in Oklahoma City. This office was located far northwest from the general population. And of course, if you didn't have transportation, you couldn't get way over here, and the bus system wasn't the best for getting you on this side of town either. So I took programs to minorities, Indians, Hispanics, blacks, everybody, in home economics. I also was in charge of half of the extension homemaker groups, so we divided the groups in half. I serviced 25 clubs and Clara serviced the other 25. And we were to meet with them at least monthly, trying to make sure they stayed on track with the national organization, and of course providing them monthly with their leader lessons that they took back to the group to educate the group members. Then the expanded food and nutrition program was here. Cass Crow was the home economist that was here with the expanded food and nutrition education program.
Can you spell her name?
Casscrowe. And Cass stayed for a couple of years after I was here, and then she left. And of course, when any educator left, the people working here had to take up the slack and do the program until they hired another person. So Clara Kelly and I took turns working with the expanded food and nutrition education program assistants. Can you believe at one time there were 25 of them also? There was a house across this campus that they met in, and we provided their weekly nutrition education training until they hired a home economist named Pat Mayfield. And Pat Mayfield stayed for, I'd say maybe 5 years, and then she left. And then in I believe it was 79, Ed Gregory approached me and said, would you consider changing over from special projects to be the expanded food and nutrition education program home economist? So I changed over to do that program. But of course, all the people that I had worked with in the extension homemaker clubs and the other community people never stopped calling you for programs. So I did lots of programs in addition to being the FNEP home economist.
When you were first hired as, when you were first hired into the system, did the Black home demonstration agents, did they still exist? Were any of them still
Yes,
around?
there were 3. Let's see. Rosa Parker was still, well, she had just retired when Dorothy and I came to work here in Oklahoma City. Dorothy Wilson was the 4-H home economist here when I was here. And Artis Fuller Artis Fuller and Inez Brooks and Dorothy Dokes were the 3 African American home economists that were still working. Dorothy Dokes worked in Okmulgee County. Inez Bruner worked in Wagner County, and Artis Fuller still worked in Bowley in Ofuskee County, and Rosa Parker was here in Oklahoma County. And shortly after we came, those home economists retired, and then it was just Dorothy, Linda, and I, the three African Americans that worked the extension program for a number of years. And then they started hiring, let's see, I think Carolyn Upaka came. I can't think of anybody else.
When you were when your task was to go out and serve minorities, did those minorities, had they ever had any experience with the extension service? Or
here in the urban area, a lot of them had not. If they had moved here from other rural areas, some of them had, but most of the people had no knowledge of the extension program. So we were really faced with the task of letting them know, even though we were a government entity, we weren't there to spy on them or turn them in for anything. We were really there for education. And it was free. So
how did, tell how you delivered those programs, or how did you get people to come? What are some of the things that the stories that you remember about that?
Well, we had a list of grassroots organizations that we contacted and told about extension service, and then we tried to set up some type of program with each one of those agencies to kind of prove ourselves. And then, of course, I joined a church, and I got to know the church people, so I set up programs for the churches and got a lot of sewing classes started, a lot of food and nutrition demonstrations, lots of money management, housing types of programs, just by word of mouth. Once you were legitimized with one person, the word got out, then you were really, really busy. So it
created your own nightmare, didn't you?
Yes, you really did. Yes.
Do you remember any of those, without naming names, do you remember any of the success stories, like a young mom or anybody that you really saw change and extension have an impact on them?
Yes, there were some Hispanic women that I met with. I couldn't speak Spanish. They kept telling me, we're going to teach you how to speak Spanish, which I really wish I had learned. But I had an interpreter, and I took sewing machines to the Latino Community Agency, and those women really turned out some nice garments once they were instructed. I also worked with lots of senior groups. I can remember a group on the northeast side, African American women that didn't know anything about sewing, so we started out just making an apron. So they mastered that, and then people started going to the fabric store saying, I'm going to make a dress, or I'm going to make a blouse, I'm going to make a skirt. So I had to get them all efficient enough to complete a garment that really looked nice. So had a lot of successes with people really learning how to turn out some nice garments.
And how did that make you feel?
Really good, really good. They were really surprised that they could do it, and just grateful for the learning.
And so after, as you were working with those 25 clubs and you had split those, were any of those predominantly minorities, or
yes,
how did that?
I was in charge of Progressive and Aimwell, and Progressive was in Luther, which is out in the rural area. Aimwell was in Arcadia, and Ready Help was in the Spencer area. And those were African groups that were minority groups. Some of them did have a few Caucasian people in them, because the Luther group had a couple of white women in it. I don't think the Spencer or the Ready Help group had anybody in it. And then I worked with white groups out in Spencer, Mrs. Eckroat, who they were the owners of the Eckroat Feed and Seed Company, and they were great homemakers. I worked with homemakers over in the Tinker area, close to the Air Force Base, in the Midwest City area. A lot of homemakers I worked with were on the south side. even after I retired, I joined that group that I had helped until it finally disbanded. All the women got so elderly and had so many problems that we just really had to just give it up.
And with those extension homemakers, did you guys attend meetings? Did you have any meetings yourself? What were those like?
Yes, they passed the club meetings around to their homes or in their community if they had a community center. So I met monthly with the groups that I was in charge of, making sure that they did their records and reports. Well, we staggered them. If I could make the meetings, I'd make 2 meetings in a day if I could, and just try to get there to help them and assist them any way in which I could.
And did you have county-wide meetings?
Yes, we had county trainings, leadership meetings, district meetings, state meetings. Took them to state state EH meeting, district EH meeting, area workshops, things of that nature. We had lots of meetings. And then we also did their quarterly extension meetings where they met here at the extension office.
And you've talked about a few, but did you have a mentor or anybody that influenced you during those early days in your career, and can you describe?
I think I would consider Clara Kelly a mentor because she was very helpful in helping you learn procedures and protocol and assisting you in any way that she could. So I think I would consider her my mentor.
And do you remember mentoring anybody yourself?
Yes. Let's see, who all came? Everybody came to visit me when they were hired. We did, back then, I think Vera Taylor, I went to Tishomingo and on a visit when I first came, because of course you had to visit other people too to find out what was going on and see how other counties operated and how the program worked in smaller counties. So I remember going to visit Vera Taylor, Marguerite Perry over in Ada, Betty Doms in Stillwater, and Gladys Logue over in Tulsa. So we made the circuit. But I think really as far as helping you day to day, since I worked here with Clara Kelly, she was probably the most influential person.
And when you were hired to work with the FNET program, which is the Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program, who was the state leader?
Irma Manning. Irma Manning was the leader that I remember.
And do you remember what year that was? You might have mentioned that.
Oh, that was like in 1979, I believe, 79, 80. Mm-hmm. And then after Irma Manning retired, Glenna Williams went to be the coordinator.
And you talked about having 25 nutrition educators.
Mm-hmm. At the beginning. Then as funds were cut, it was cut to 15. And then this county and Tulsa County always managed to have 12 to 15 program assistants.
And did they all office here in this office? Did they work?
No, they basically still worked out of their homes. Like I said, there was a building across on the edge of this campus, and it was a white building, so we called it the White House. Several rooms, so the nutrition people always met over there because they could not be housed in this office. This office was too small to have that many people. And then, of course, they came in every week on a Wednesday, half a day, for their training, to do their records and reports and get the supplies and stuff that they needed to work with. And then they were geographically placed all over the county to reach the people in their area that received food stamps and were low income.
And do you remember any of the names of some of those that you worked with?
Yes, I remember Miss Smiley. Miss Nero is still alive. Geneva Gentry, Marie Chesser, Mary Lou Jesco, Bertha Seebeck. Yeah, there were lots of them.
As you have thought back across your extension career, there's always things that happen that you know you'll just never forget. A story, an episode, something that took place. What are some, can you name one of those for us?
Okay, we're working with youth. We worked the youth program. In the summertime, we were trying to be creative. Weber gave us these little grills, and we decided we were going to do the hobo package that 4-H kids learn how to do with the low-income kids at the community centers. So we set up programs in the morning and in the afternoon. We did programs down, straight down from the office on the south part of town at a community center. And then we set up a program that afternoon in the Luther Jones area. So we didn't realize you cannot transport a hot grill in your car. So we had finished our first program, and we were trying to decide what to do with the coals and how to cool down the grills when we determined we could not transport a hot grill from the south part of Oklahoma City to the Spencer Luther area. So we had to call and cancel the programs for that afternoon and reschedule because we could not do that.
Just one little detail.
Right, one little simple detail. You could not put a hot grill in your car, or you might have a problem.
As an FNAP coordinator, what was the favorite part of your job?
I think we did what we call graduations. Every 6 months, those homemakers that had significantly improved and had reached a significant level of education were brought here, and we had a graduation ceremony in the auditorium. We did light refreshments, and of course we had them to tell some of the successes that they had had and some of their experiences in working with the nutrition assistant, and then we awarded them their certificates. For some of them, this was the first time they had ever received any type of paper showing accomplishment, so that was a big deal. And we always had a little speaker that came and gave an encouraging message, and then we called out everybody's name, and everybody came and got their certificate and had refreshments afterwards.
Meant a lot
so that
to
was,
them.
yes, it really did. Yeah.
And about how many would you have during each graduation?
25 to 30 people would successfully complete the program. I think one of the disappointing things was to get homemakers started and then lose them, because these were people that were very mobile for various reasons, money, jobs, just because they were poor and couldn't live at one location for a long period of time. So we lost a lot of good homemakers. I thought that it was kind of disheartening. If they did not feel the program valuable enough to call us and tell us that they had moved somewhere else, then we just dropped a lot of people that we really should have helped.
And what was your least favorite part?
The report, the records and the reports. And of course, with any government program, you've got to document and account for everything. And the reports were just really, really tedious, and keeping the women current day to day, keeping up, logging everything that needed to take place in order to have successful 6 months and yearly reports. And yes, Washington, D.C., the lady Edith Thomas called me many a day saying, item so-and-so and item so-and-so in your report do not add up. So go back and find your mistake.
And she was actually out of Washington, D.C.?
Yes, she was. Yes.
And she didn't go through the state office? She would call you directly?
No, they called you directly if your report was not adding up.
Wow.
So I remember getting calls, and I remember staying here late with some of the nutrition assistants that we had, what we call leader aides. And they were kind of top-notch people who kind of assisted the shire or the nutrition people that didn't do their work as efficiently as they should. So the leader aides would help me make sure the reports were done right. And they were the group of people that I could call in, and we did the reports by hand before we had computers. And all of that hand counting and adding and all of that was really tedious. And I remember being here late 7, 8 o'clock in the evening, trying to get the reports to match up and going through nutrition assistance reports line by line to catch the errors.
I've never heard the term leader aides.
Mhm.
That's the first I've heard of that.
Mhm.
Did other counties?
Yeah, everybody had leader aides. I think ask Carlene, did she have leader aides?
And with those leader aides, did they get paid more?
A little, yeah. They were people that had been with the program longer years and knew the ins and outs of everything. So they were the more experienced people.
And what was the process of selecting and letting them know that they'd been selected?
Just their performance and the fact that, they were people that grasped things quickly and were able to explain to other co-workers how to do things easier and a better way or easier way to do this. So, they were the ones that were selected to be a leader aide.
How many were you allowed to have?
I think I had 2 to 3, no more than 3. Mm-hmm.
And then when one of them resigned or retired, did that open up a slot, or it just depended on if
It just depended upon if we needed a leader aide. And then, of course, like I said, when computers came in, it made the job a whole lot easier, because then the computer would point out that these numbers don't add up. So, we could find the mistakes easier when we had computers.
Over the course of your extension career, and you came on in '73. When did you retire?
December 2006. I had worked 34 years, 11 months, and 26 days, and Risa Garcia said, "Why don't you work 4 more days?" I said, "No." Sue Bonner said, "No." And it would not make a difference in my take-home retirement pay. And it would mess up the records. So I had to leave in 34 years, 11 months, and 26 days.
But hey, who's counting?
Right. So it didn't hurt my feelings.
I wonder what you said that Sue thought it would mess up the record. Why? Because she already had it.
She already had it, yes, because your actual years of service plus your unused annual and sick leave, your unused sick leave counted toward extra years. So you met with her 6 to 9 months ahead of time to kind of do your projected date, and all the figures and everything were already plugged in. So your end date was set in stone pretty much once you went to the retirement seminar, so you couldn't really change it. So I was paid. I never did get to use up all my annual leave. I was supposed to be off, but doing my end of the year detail reports and records and stuff and work, Stillwater was not too happy. They had to pay me over $1,000 in unused annual leave simply because I could not take off. I had stuff I was assigned to do.
So over that span of those, you have it down to an exact science, 34, your years. Overall, how did you see the Cooperative Extension Service change? What changes did you notice?
Well, we changed names numerous times. We changed job responsibilities a lot. We changed program emphasis a lot. Trainings were held differently. The districts split up. When I came, there were 5 districts. We were in the central, Oklahoma and Tulsa were in the central district, and then we were divided out we were put in the southwest district, and Tulsa went to the northwest district. So just lots of changes.
And I remember your retirement reception. What do you remember about that?
Well, I was just overwhelmed at the number of people that came and the gifts they gave me and the recognition and just the friends I had made during the years.
It was truly a community. You could tell you were loved by the community. Is there anything else that you would like to share?
Well, I can't think of it. I'm sure I'll think of something later that I should have said, but right now I can't really. I just really enjoyed all the people I met during the years, lots of friends, and white, black, Indian. One other thing, when I came, there were Indian agents here also. There was an Indian program that worked with Indians. And that home economist, her name was Margaret, I can't think of the last name, but she went on to work for DHS. That program went out right after we got here. And Margaret went to work for DHS, but there were Indian home economists that worked the Indian
Do you remember about how
program.
many there were?
Maybe 5 or 6 here in the for the whole state. And they were Indian in origin and then worked with a lot of the Indians.
So they were pretty well housed in those populations.
Mm-hmm.
And about when did that phase out?
Probably early 70s, maybe late 60s, early 70s.
Any other historically significant things that you can think of during your time, or possibly meeting anyone of historical significance?
I think the county directors that I really liked working with were L.B. McClure. He treated everybody equal, and one of his favorite things were everybody's over 21. So I'm not going to babysit you or prod you along because you're over 21 and you should be able to make your own decisions and do your own thing. And then another favorite person, when I went to Grady County, Ron Justice and the staff there were very opening and accepting and helpful. And of course, Brad Tipton and them were helpful over in Canadian County too. So I really enjoyed branching out to the other counties that I worked in the later years.
Having FNEP there, FNEP and
Yes.
the
And
100.
Mhm.
Well, Miss Loveta, it's been a joy. We miss you.
Yes, I miss you all too.
We miss you, and we thank you so much for, one, your service, but thank you for participating in our project.
Well, you're welcome.
And we wish you well in your continued retirement.
Well, thank you. I'm certainly enjoying it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.